I'm Claire Monroe. I'm 29, a full-time waitress at a cozy Italian restaurant tucked between a flower shop and a bookstore on Hawthorne Street in Portland. Last week, I got the email that I'd been awarded a full scholarship to a 12-month accelerated nursing program. It was the first step toward the life I'd been working toward for years, something stable, something real. I was also engaged. His name was Travis Whitmore, 34, high-profile attorney, always in a pressed Navy suit, the kind of man who smelled like money and control. He used to come into the restaurant late at night, always sitting at the same corner booth with a book in hand, like he was waiting for someone who never showed. That's how we met. He once told me, "You make me feel normal." I thought that was love. I really did. That Friday evening, the restaurant buzzed with laughter and wine glasses clinking. The staff knew Travis was coming. I'd even curled my hair during my break. There was a quiet hopefulness in the air, like maybe he'd propose in front of everyone, finally affirm that a girl like me belonged in his world. Instead, he pulled me out to the back patio, the place where we'd shared stolen kisses and late-night takeout. "We need to talk," he said. And then, with the precision of a surgeon, he returned the ring. "Claire," he said, not even blinking, "I need someone who fits into my world a little better." I stood there in my apron, marinara on my sleeve, while he looked at me like I was a decision he'd already filed away. And then, as if to twist the knife, his mother appeared from the shadows, reaching for the ring, explaining, with a smile too tight to be kind, "It's been in the family for 3 generations." I nodded. What else could I do? My chest was hollow. I walked back inside. No one said anything. No one had to. I wasn't crying, not yet. By the time I got home to my tiny studio, it was already done. My clothes were folded into boxes. My toothbrush, packed. On the table was a note scribbled in that neat, sharp handwriting of his. "I'm sorry. She's better for my future." That was it. No name, no signature, just that. My phone buzzed with missed calls from my manager. Rent was due. My scholarship didn't cover relocation. I had $78.42 in my bank account. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the door. For a long time, I didn't move. It only takes 5 minutes to ruin someone's life. But it doesn't mean that's where the story ends. I didn't sleep that night, not really. After packing what little I had into a single carry-on and rereading his note more times than I care to admit, I lay there on the edge of my bed, staring at the crack in the ceiling like it could give me answers. The silence felt louder than heartbreak. I didn't know where to go, only that I couldn't stay. At 6:14, I called Eliza. She answered on the first ring. "Claire." Her voice was warm and steady, like the crackle of a fireplace in winter. "I don't have anywhere to go," I said, barely holding it together. "You do now," she replied. "Get here. I'll make tea." I took the last Greyhound out of Portland that afternoon, riding 5 hours through fog and farmland, past towns with names I'd only ever seen on gas station mugs. When I stepped off the bus, Eliza was waiting at the corner of the parking lot, wrapped in her signature mustard coat and holding a paper bag with my favorite lemon muffins from the cafe she used to run. She didn't hug me. Eliza never was one for dramatics. She simply handed me the bag and said, "You're home now." Eliza lived in a small craftsman cottage just outside Ashland, tucked between a maple grove and a rusted white fence that leaned like it was tired. I hadn't seen her in 4 years, not since she sold the restaurant and disappeared into semi-retirement. But nothing had changed. The garden still smelled of rosemary and mint. The kettle still whistled like it had opinions. For a week, I helped her around the house. I raked leaves, swept the porch, cleaned out a shed that smelled like old paint and forgotten promises. It felt good to move, to do something that didn't require smiling through pain or pretending to be fine. Eliza never asked about Travis, or the ring, or why I looked like I'd been hollowed out. She just fed me, gave me space, and sometimes placed a gentle hand on my shoulder when I looked like I might fall apart. It was on a Tuesday afternoon, while we were pulling weeds from the back garden, that her phone rang. She answered, listened for a long time without saying much, and then glanced at me from under the brim of her sun hat. Her eyes narrowed in thought. When she hung up, she said, "How do you feel about mountains?" I blinked. "What kind of question is that? I just got a call from an old friend," she said, brushing dirt from her gloves. She manages a private estate up near Crater Lake. They're looking for someone to assist with personal care. Live in. Secluded place. Pays well. Very well. "I don't have a nursing license," I reminded her. "They don't need a license," she said. "They need someone who won't quit, someone who can listen, and someone who isn't scared off by a little cold silence." I hesitated. "Why me? Because—" "Claire," she said, looking at me like she was seeing through every cracked layer. "You have something that can't be taught. You don't walk away, even when you should." That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of chamomile and the number scribbled on a yellow sticky note. I stared at it until the numbers blurred. Then I dialed. The man who answered had a clipped British accent, as polished as a marble floor. Amos speaking. "Hi," I began, suddenly unsure of how to even sound competent. "My name is Claire Monroe. I was told there's a position—" "Yes," he interrupted. "Live-in caregiver. Must be available full-time. Interview is at 9 sharp tomorrow? You'll receive a text with the address. Do not be late." And just like that, the call ended. The next morning, before dawn broke over the tree line, I packed my things, kissed Eliza goodbye, and boarded a local shuttle that climbed out of town and into higher altitudes. The air grew crisper as we wound our way up through the evergreens. I didn't know where I was going exactly. All I had was an address, a suitcase, and a strange flutter in my chest that felt oddly like the beginnings of hope. 3 hours later, the car slowed in front of a black iron gate nestled between two towering pines. Beyond it stood a house that didn't look like it belonged to the world the rest of us lived in. All glass and steel and edges sharp enough to cut, it jutted from the mountainside like it had dared gravity to stop it. The gate opened without a sound. I stepped out of the car, my boots crunching softly against the gravel. The front door opened before I could knock. Standing there was Amos, tall, precise, not a hair out of place. He gave me a once-over, unreadable. "You're early," he said. "I didn't want to be late," I replied, clutching my bag. He gave the faintest nod. "Follow me." And just like that, I crossed the threshold into a world I didn't belong to, one ruled by quiet tension, hidden pain, and a man I hadn't yet met, but whose life would soon change mine. The air inside the estate was colder than the mountain wind I'd just stepped out of. Amos led me through a hallway so silent it felt like it had forgotten how to echo. My boots barely made a sound on the stone floor, and every step deeper into that house felt like crossing some invisible threshold, one I wouldn't be able to retreat from. The interview, if you could call it that, lasted less than 10 minutes. Amos asked for my ID, glanced over my resume, and laid out the rules in a voice as clipped as the collar of his pressed shirt. 24-hour availability, 1 day off per month, no visitors, no social media, no questions unless asked. Discretion is non-negotiable. I nodded, understood. He looked at me for a long second. "You'll meet Mr. Alden now. I'd suggest you don't mistake kindness for necessity. He doesn't offer either." I followed him up a spiral staircase so wide it could have been carved for royalty. At the top was a long corridor, dimly lit, ending in a set of heavy black double doors. Amos knocked twice. No response. Then he pushed the doors open without waiting. The room was more like a private observatory than a bedroom. Glass walls overlooked the pines and cliffs beyond. Sunlight diffused through pale curtains. In the center, facing away from us, sat a man in a sleek, matte black wheelchair. He didn't move, didn't turn. "Mr. Alden," Amos said, crisp as ever. "Your new caregiver, Claire Monroe." The man by the window slowly turned his head. Henry Alden. I had read the name once or twice in business headlines. long before the accident that took his mobility. They used to call him the architect, a self-made investor who'd built tech empires and destroyed others before breakfast. The man in front of me now looked nothing like the photos. He was lean, pale, prematurely silver-haired, and wrapped in a presence sharper than any blade. His eyes met mine like he was assessing a chessboard board already. He didn't greet me. He just stared and said, "You're number 12. I blinked. "I'm sorry, the 12th one they've sent since January." It was March. I straightened my shoulders. I'm not here to compete or impress, just to do my job. "Good," he said, voice flat. "I don't need friends. And I certainly don't need saving." Then he turned back to the window like I was no more significant than a reflection in the glass. The next few days felt like living inside a locked vault, quiet, cold, and just claustrophobic enough to remind you that freedom was a fantasy. My room was down the hall from his. The staff spoke little and always moved in silence. Meals were delivered to his suite on a silver tray. I was instructed to administer medications, monitor vitals, and coordinate with his physical therapist, though no therapist had been allowed in since January either. Henry, for his part, treated me like wallpaper. He spoke only when absolutely necessary, and even then with the sort of clipped disdain that made it clear he expected me to vanish before the week was up. But I didn't vanish. I kept to my tasks. I didn't flinch when he threw sarcasm like darts. I didn't respond when he tested boundaries. I'd spent years navigating kitchens where men yelled and knives flew. Words didn't scare me. Still, the silence got to me. Until the third night. The wind had picked up just after midnight, howling through the tall pines like something angry was clawing at the house. I couldn't sleep, so I slipped out of bed, padded quietly down the hallway, and turned toward the kitchen for some tea. That's when I saw it. A faint glow pulsed from under the door to the West Wing gym, the one I'd been told was strictly off limits. The light flickered like movement. My instincts kicked in. I told myself he'd probably left a TV on, but my gut said otherwise. I approached, heart pounding, and pushed the door open just enough to peer inside. And there he was, Henry Alden. Not in his chair, but standing. His legs trembled under his weight, arms gripped tight around a pair of parallel bars. Sweat slicked his forehead. Every inch of his body looked like it was screaming in resistance. But he was doing it, alone, in silence, without fanfare or witnesses. He didn't see me until the door creaked slightly. He looked up. Fury exploded across his face. "What the hell are you doing?" he snapped. I thought something was wrong. I saw the light, get out, but I didn't move. Something in me refused. "Why are you hiding this?" I asked, voice low. Why pretend his hands clenched tighter? Because if people see hope, they expect miracles. And if I fail again, I get to relive the disappointment this time through their eyes. I stepped forward slowly. But this isn't failure. It's power. You're still fighting. His jaw tightened. I don't need your encouragement. I'm not offering it. I'm offering help. Real help. No judgment, no expectations, just partnership. Silence stretched between us, thick and tense. Finally, he sank slowly back into his chair, exhausted. "You tell no one," he muttered. "I won't. You follow my lead. If I say stop, we stop. If I say go, I help." I finished. His eyes met mine again, something unreadable flickering beneath the ice. "You're not like the others," he said. I shrugged. I wasn't trying to be different. I just wasn't willing to leave, especially now. From the moment Henry allowed me into that secret, a silent pact had been sealed between us. We trained before sunrise, hidden from the staff and the world. Step by painful step, he pushed against gravity, while I stood beside him, no cheerleading, no pity, just presence. It became our rhythm, until one morning, everything shifted. The doorbell rang at precisely 9:00 And even from the east wing, I could hear the confident, heavy footsteps echoing through the entryway. Voices followed smooth, controlled, familiar with the architecture of power. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and peeked around the edge of the hallway just as Amos opened the sitting room doors. And there he was, Wade Kingsley. I recognized him immediately from tech magazine covers and Henry's old press photos. He was a co-founder of Alden Kingsley Ventures, Henry's longtime business partner and now, according to the whispers in the hall, the interim face of the empire Henry had built. Wade looked effortlessly polished, like he belonged to every boardroom he walked into. Navy blazer, subtle gold cufflinks, and that unnerving grin men like him always seemed to wear like armor. Henry, Wade drawled, spreading his arms as if greeting an old war buddy. Still alive, I see. Henry gave a tight smile from his wheelchair. Emotion unreadable. And you're still punctual? They shook hands, the kind of handshake you'd never confuse for warmth. I entered with a tray of tea and placed it gently on the table. Wade's gaze flicked toward me, assessing, lingering half a second too long. This the new nurse, he asked Henry without looking away from me. Henry didn't blink. She's not here for your entertainment. Wade chuckled. Relax. I'm just making conversation. He turned back to Henry. Anyway, I've brought the latest drafts. We need to talk timelines. They started speaking in clipped, coded language investment vehicles, holding structures, temporary asset control. On the surface, it all sounded like business as usual. But then Wade mentioned something that made my stomach drop. Kingsley Holdings is ready to assume administrative control, he said, tapping a folder. Just until things settle. Of course, it's a safety measure. Investors need to see a stable front. Henry stayed silent. Wade continued, smooth as ever. No ownership changes, just signature authority. It'll ease the tension on the board. Laura's already approved. Laura. The name froze me. Laura Harrow was the CEO of Harrow Equity, the same firm Travis's new fiancé had ties to. Elise Harrow. This couldn't be coincidence. I'll review the documents, Henry said quietly, eyes not meeting Wade's. Wade smiled, triumphant. Of course. No pressure, just sooner rather than later. You know how fragile confidence can be these days. As soon as he left, I returned to the room and began gathering the empty cups, pretending not to notice the tension that now wrapped itself around Henry's shoulders. But I couldn't pretend. Later that night, while Henry was in the study, I made a decision I knew crossed a line. I went into the west filing room, the one Henry rarely used anymore. It took me 2 hours to find it tucked behind an old contract archive, a slim black folder labeled KH Contingency Agreement. Inside were transfer clauses, all signed by secondary proxies, none by Henry. The final page, an unsigned consent form, awaiting Henry's initials. If signed, Wade wouldn't just be helping. He'd own effective control of Alden Kingsley's assets. And through a quiet subsidiary, that power would route straight through to Harrow Equity. They were bleeding him dry in slow motion, betting on his silence, his fatigue, his paralysis, and maybe on the fact that he didn't have anyone left to question them. I did. The next morning, I brought the file to him. He was in the library, tracing the spines of old books with quiet fingers. I found something you should see, I said softly. Henry looked up. I placed the folder in front of him, watching his expression carefully as he flipped through the contents. With each page, his jaw clenched tighter. When he reached the last signature line, he closed the folder. You shouldn't have gone through my files, he said. I know. I replied. Silence settled between us. Finally, he looked at me, not like a nurse, not like an employee, but as something else, an equal, maybe a witness. You were right, he said. He's not helping me. He's replacing me. My voice was steady, and he thinks you're too broken to stop him. Henry didn't speak again for a long while. He simply wheeled himself to the window and stared out over the mountains, the late afternoon light casting long, fractured shadows across the floor. Then he said, almost to himself, "I trusted him with everything. I thought he was my friend." I took a step closer. "So what now?" Henry turned to face me. The bitterness in his expression hadn't faded, but something new had crept in resolve. "Now," he said, voice low but firm, "you're going to help me stand. For real. We're going to take back what's mine." And for the first time since I'd arrived, I believed him. He didn't say it like a man making a promise, he said it like a declaration of war. Henry Alden was done hiding, and I was done watching him be dismantled piece by piece. From that moment on, everything shifted. We turned the West Study into a war room. For the next 3 weeks, we lived in a rhythm built from grit and fury. I spent my days helping him walk again, counting each step as if it were currency. And in the evenings, we pored over financial records, board meeting transcripts, proxy contracts tracing every shadow Wade Kingsley had left behind. Henry pushed through the pain with a focus I'd never seen before. His body still trembled after every session, but his voice stayed firm, his eyes sharper by the day. I'd seen men crumble from less. He didn't. Not even when his knees buckled. Not even when the physical therapist Amos secretly brought in said, "It's unlikely he'll be walking unaided anytime soon." Unlikely wasn't the same as impossible. One night, I walked into the gym and found Henry standing without support, sweat soaking through his shirt, chest heaving. He looked up at me, eyes burning, jaw clenched, and said, "They think I'm dead. I want them to see that the ghost came back swinging." The week before the shareholder meeting, Henry's lawyer, a fierce woman named Alondra Vega, arrived at the house. She carried 3 briefcases full of documentation and not a shred of patience for excuses. Together, we stitched together every email, every clause, every forged trail Wade had left in his quiet coup. Alondra called it a textbook case of fiduciary betrayal. Henry called it personal. I ironed his suit myself the night before the meeting navy, crisp, lined with steel thread cuffs. His cane, polished black walnut, gleamed beside it. "You sure you're ready for this?" I asked him. He didn't look at the suit. He looked at me. They built an empire on my name, Claire, and now they're going to see that name walk back into that boardroom on its own feet. We arrived 15 minutes early. The building sat like a mirrored monolith downtown, all chrome and silence. I walked beside him across the marble lobby, heels echoing against glass. Every head turned. Some whispered. One assistant gasped. No one expected Henry Alden to walk again, especially not into the room they'd already buried him in. The boardroom doors opened. Wade was already seated at the head of the table, flanked by Laura Harrow in her signature ash-gray suit. To her right, somehow, was Travis dressed like he belonged there, pretending he wasn't the man who'd once shoved all my things into boxes and locked me out of his future. He looked at me, blinked, and then quickly looked away. Henry didn't sit at the far end. He walked to the center, planted his cane into the carpet like a flag, and said, "This meeting is now under my authority." No one interrupted. He placed the leather folder on the table and flipped it open with deliberate calm. One by one, he laid out the evidence, the backdoor agreements, the shell company formations, the forged approval signatures traced to Wade's assistant. A full PowerPoint was unnecessary. The facts spoke for themselves. Wade turned pale. Laura kept her composure, though I could see the pulse ticking at her neck. "You can't prove I intended to take over," Wade said finally, voice shaking. "Intent is abstract." Henry didn't blink. "I don't need to prove intent. I only need to prove breach of trust." And I just did. Alondra stood. Per Article 7 of the board charter, we now call for an emergency vote of no confidence. No one objected. Travis looked like he wanted to melt into his chair. As each hand rose, one by one, Wade's jaw slackened. The count was unanimous. His role revoked, the documents nullified. Control of Alden Kingsley reverted back to its rightful hands. When it was done, the room sat in stunned silence. Then, Henry turned to face them. "Before I go," he said, "there's one more thing." He pointed at me. "This woman," he said slowly, "is the only person who told me the truth when it cost her everything. The only one who stood beside me while I crawled my way back. She was a waitress when I met her. She's my partner now." Wade scoffed. "A waitress?" He spat. "You're seriously going to put your company in the hands of someone who served lasagna 2 months ago?" Henry turned back to the table. "She saved more than my body. She saved what was left of me." Laura stood abruptly, heels clicking like a threat. "You don't know who you're challenging." "Oh, I do," Henry said, quieter than before. "A woman hiding behind her father's fortune, and a man who abandoned his friend for a shortcut." The room cleared quickly after that. When the doors finally shut behind the last shareholder, Henry leaned against the table, catching his breath. I stepped beside him, my hand brushing the edge of his sleeve. "You did it," I whispered. He didn't look at me. "No," he said, breath shallow, voice steady. "We did." We left the boardroom in silence, not because there was nothing to say, but because saying anything would have made it smaller than it was. Henry walked beside me. No wheelchair, no cane, just measured steps, slow, firm. His breath was ragged, but his spine was straight. That night, the house felt different, not warmer, not louder but lighter. The shadows that once hung over every room seemed to recede, as if they knew they were no longer welcome here. The staff returned to their duties without the quiet dread. Windows that had been shuttered for months were opened again. Air flowed. So did time. I didn't leave. I wasn't a nurse anymore. Wasn't a guest. I had become something else, something less easily named, but deeply rooted. I was his co-conspirator in healing, his sparring partner in rebuilding, his mirror when he forgot who he was. And he, in turn, became something far more than the broken man I had first met. Together, we drafted the blueprint for a new venture, a foundation for community health that merged physical recovery with emotional resilience. It wasn't just a business. It was the thing we both wished we'd had when we were most alone, when we'd been abandoned, underestimated, uninvited. Henry called it Auron, a word that meant nothing to most but everything to us. It was a fusion of aura and endure. We poured our pain into it, refined it, then built something better from the ash. I opened my own rehabilitation center 2 towns over. Small, clean, intentional. I trained staff the way I would have wanted to be treated: quiet dignity, fierce compassion, no forced smiles. Patients didn't have to pretend there. They just had to show up. Henry still walked with a slight limp, but he no longer fought the floor. He cooked dinner once a week, burned rice half the time, and called it culinary rebellion. I laughed more than I had in years, real laughter, the kind that doesn't check the room first. One evening, while we were standing over a pan of something barely edible, he reached into the drawer, not the one with the utensils, but the one where we kept the things we didn't know how to name yet. He pulled out a small box. Inside, a ring, simple gold, no fanfare. He didn't kneel. "I'm not asking for ceremony," he said. "I'm just asking if you'd keep walking with me. No finish lines. Just this." I slid the ring onto my finger and didn't say yes. I didn't need to. He knew. Weeks later. A message came from Travis. 2 words. "You okay?" I stared at the screen for a moment long enough to feel the faintest flicker of old ache, and then deleted it without typing a single letter. No anger. No closure needed. That story was over. What mattered had already been claimed, because I wasn't waiting to be chosen anymore. I had chosen myself. The house on the mountain stopped feeling like a fortress. It became a place we lived in, not hid in. We painted the west hallway in warm tones. We replanted the dead flower beds. Sometimes we hosted quiet dinners with no dress code and too many desserts. Sometimes we just sat by the window and said nothing at all. But there were moments rare and sudden when I'd glance at him across the room. standing in full height, eyes soft but clear. And I'd remember who we had once been, a man resigned to disappearing, and a woman just trying to survive. We were no longer either. And me, I no longer introduced myself as just a waitress, or the girl who got left. I was Claire Monroe, founder, partner, witness to ruin, architect of return. I'd stopped apologizing for being loud, or quiet, or angry, or ambitious. Stopped explaining why I stayed, or why I left. Stopped asking people to see me clearly, because I finally saw myself. I used to think value came from being chosen by a man, by a job, by a family that never made room. Now I know better. Worth is not borrowed, dignity is not granted, and the version of me they threw away was never the whole of me. So I stood shoulders even, ring on finger, spine like a spine should be. Then I closed the door behind me and stepped forward. Not to prove anything, but because I could.